History loves drama. The bloodier, pettier, or more humiliating a story is, the longer it sticks. Somewhere between dusty scrolls and Hollywood scripts, tiny exaggerations grew into facts. And we, trusting creatures that we are, just repeated them like parrots with Wi-Fi. Every generation inherits a bag of truths that turn out to be about as accurate as a drunk time traveler. So today, we're opening that bag, dumping it on the table, and sorting out what's real, what's rumor, and what's pure marketing from the past. Because the truth? History isn't just written by the winners. It's edited by gossipers, repackaged by poets, and remixed by memes. Welcome to history's 5 biggest lies you actually believed. Grab your emotional support beverage. This is going to be a wild correction session. Napoleon Bonaparte. Short king or tall tale? If there were awards for most misrepresented human in history, Napoleon would win, and then immediately invade the award ceremony. He's remembered as the pocket-sized tyrant with anger issues. The man so short, he needed a stepladder to glare properly. Whole jokes revolve around him. Psychologists even named a complex after him. But the punchline falls apart when you realize Napoleon wasn't short at all. Average height, above average ego. When Napoleon died in 1821, his doctor listed his height as 5 feet 2 inches. British newspapers had a field day. Ha! Tiny emperor exposed! Except, those were French inches. A French inch was longer than the British one. Do the math, and Napoleon was around 5'6" to 5'7" in modern terms, average for his era, even slightly taller than the typical Frenchman. So why did everyone decide he was basically a military smurf? Because the British were masters of psychological warfare. They didn't just fight his armies, they fought his image. Britain's 18th century meme machine. Imagine the internet, but with quills. That's 1800s London. Printmakers like James Gillray pumped out political cartoons faster than today's meme accounts. They drew Napoleon as a furious toddler with a hat bigger than his body, shaking his fists at giant British soldiers. The public adored it. It was funny, it was patriotic, and best of all, it humiliated the enemy without needing an actual battle. Propaganda spreads better than truth, especially when it's hilarious. Soon, Europe was filled with paintings, pamphlets, and pub jokes about Little Boney. And because no one could Google his real height, the myth became fact. The tiny general goes global. When Napoleon rose to power, his enemies doubled down on the short man, big temper angle. It made him seem insecure, ridiculous, the kind of man who conquers half a continent just to prove he can reach the top shelf. Even decades after his death, writers and historians recycled the insult because it fits so neatly into a dramatic story arc. By the time the 20th century rolled around, calling someone Napoleonic was shorthand for short and overcompensating. Congratulations, British propaganda, your 200-year-old meme is still trending. So what was he really like? Napoleon was ambitious, brilliant, egotistical, yes, but physically, perfectly normal. He surrounded himself with tall guards, the Imperial Guard, which made him look smaller in comparison. Add thick-heeled boots, massive hats, and artists who like dramatic proportions, and boom, instant illusion of shortness. Think of it like group photos. If everyone else is 6'2" and you're 5'8", the camera isn't doing you favors. The birth of a complex. Psychologists later coined Napoleon complex to describe short men supposedly driven by insecurity. but it's built on a historical glitch. The actual Napoleon had no record of height-related neurosis. His letters obsess over politics, not platform shoes. It's like diagnosing a guy with road rage because his horse was smaller than yours. In reality, Napoleon's biggest insecurity wasn't size, it was status. He rose from minor nobility to emperor in a world that worshipped birthright. Every decision, every battle, every reform screamed, "See, I belong here." His real complex was about legitimacy, not leg length. Why the lie worked so well? Humans love irony. A tiny man ruling giant empires? Chef's kiss. It's poetic, it's visual, it's easy to remember. Facts rarely stand a chance against a great punchline. Also, mocking him made Britain feel better. They'd spent years terrified of the guy. Turning him into a cartoon baby with a sword was therapeutic national comedy. Napoleon's actual legacy. Strip away the memes and you get one of the most revolutionary leaders in history. He rewrote Europe, but a few witty drawings rewrote him. That's the power of storytelling and slander. So next time someone jokes about the Napoleon complex, remember, it wasn't the man who was small, it was the history textbooks. The afterlife of a meme. Even today, comedians, teachers, and YouTubers use the short Napoleon trope because it's convenient shorthand. The myth survived revolutions, movies, and even TikTok because we crave simple archetypes. And short, angry dictator fits perfectly into our collective imagination. Meanwhile, real historians keep quietly screaming into their books, "He was average height! Stop drawing horns on him!" But let's face it, the meme won. When propaganda is funny, it becomes immortal. Small in myth, massive in impact. Napoleon's story is a perfect reminder that perception outlives reality. He rewrote Europe, but a few witty drawings rewrote him. That's the power of storytelling and slander. So next time someone jokes about the Napoleon complex, remember, it wasn't the man who was small, it was the history textbooks. Number 2. Gladiators, Rome's most overhyped reality show. When you think of ancient Rome, your brain probably jumps straight to the Colosseum. Roaring crowds, gleaming armor, blood on the sand, and Russell Crowe yelling something inspirational about being entertained. But the truth is, that image is about as historically accurate as a Wi-Fi router in Pompeii. Because gladiators didn't actually fight to the death. Most of them lived to fight another day, and that wasn't mercy, it was good business. The Colosseum, ancient Rome's favorite reality show. Let's start with the vibe. The Colosseum wasn't just a giant murder pit, it was basically the Netflix of ancient Rome. It had everything: drama, action, romance, politics, and best of all, it was free. Emperors used games to keep the public happy, because if the people were too busy watching two guys whack each other with swords, they weren't busy questioning why the empire was falling apart. It's the oldest political trick in the book: bread and circuses. Feed them carbs, give them carnage, and they'll vote for you forever. The business of blood, without the death part. Now, let's talk logistics. A gladiator wasn't some random dude thrown into an arena to die. He was an investment. You had to buy him, train him, feed him, and keep him alive long enough to entertain a crowd. Killing your fighter was like throwing away your best Formula One car after one race. Sure, it's dramatic, but it's also very, very stupid. That's why most gladiator fights ended when one fighter was injured, disarmed, or just too tired to continue. Death was rare, and when it did happen, it was considered a waste, not a victory.
Some sources suggest only 1 in 10 fights ended fatally. That's safer than modern boxing. Okay, maybe not safer, but at least comparable. Referees, rules, and real sportsmanship. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Gladiator fights had referees. They wore white robes and carried sticks to separate fighters when things got too intense. If a fighter was injured or surrendered, the ref would step in to stop the match. Yes, surrender existed. Fighters could raise a finger to signal defeat, a move called missio. If the crowd liked the loser's performance, they'd shout for mercy. If they didn't, well, that's when things could turn ugly. But still, most of the time, the defeated gladiator walked away alive. Bruised, maybe missing a few teeth, but alive. The famous thumbs down lie. Movies love showing the emperor giving a dramatic thumbs down signal to condemn a fighter. It's cinematic gold. But historically, no one knows what that gesture actually meant. Roman texts say pollis verso, turned thumb, but they never specify which direction meant what. Many scholars believe thumbs down actually meant mercy, and thumbs up meant to kill him. So yes, every time you've given a YouTube video a thumbs down, congratulations, you've been sparing lives, not ending them. Gladiators weren't just slaves. Another twist, not all gladiators were slaves. Sure, some were prisoners of war or criminals, but others were volunteers. People literally signed up for this life. Why? Fame, money, and adrenaline. A successful gladiator could become a celebrity. Fans adored them, women swooned over them, merchants sold their likeness on oil lamps and wall art. Some gladiators were so famous, they had groupies waiting outside the arena gates. There's graffiti in Pompeii that reads, Crescens the Net Fighter, the delight of all the girls. That's basically a fan tweet from 2,000 years ago. Training like champions. Gladiators lived in specialized schools called ludi, managed by tough-as-nails trainers known as lanistae. These places were part military boot camp, part Olympic training center. They learned different fighting styles, the heavily armored Murmillo, the nimble Retiarius with a net and trident, and the Secutor, who was basically his rival. Each matchup was designed for spectacle, strength for speed, brute force versus agility. Their diets were surprisingly modern. They ate mostly barley, beans, and grains, earning the nickname Barley Men. Archaeologists even found evidence that they drank a tonic made of vinegar and ash, like ancient Gatorade if Gatorade was brewed in a forge. Healthcare, ancient Rome style. If you broke a bone in the Colosseum, you didn't just get tossed aside. Gladiators had decent medical care, better in fact than most citizens. Roman physicians studied their wounds to improve surgical techniques. In a weird way, gladiators helped advance ancient medicine. You could say they bled for science. And yes, doctors were present at the games, because nothing ruins a spectacle like someone dying before the next round. The psychology of the arena. So why did Romans love this stuff so much? To them, it wasn't just about violence. It was about discipline, courage, and control. Watching a man stand his ground under pressure was inspiring. It represented the Roman ideal, strength through composure. Even the act of sparing a defeated gladiator wasn't just mercy. It was proof that Rome could control life and death. It was political theater disguised as entertainment. The arena was a mirror of Roman society, ruthless, organized, and obsessed with spectacle. Morning shows, afternoon drama. A typical day at the Colosseum was split like a TV schedule. Mornings were brutal. Animal hunts and executions of criminals. Think of it as the violent warm-up act. By midday, the crowd had seen enough death. That's when the real fights began. Skilled gladiators battling for glory, not survival. The crowd cheered, booed, and place bets. It was all about the showmanship. The best fighters became legends. Their names were carved into walls, some in songs, and remembered long after their final match. Fame, fortune, and freedom. Winning enough matches could earn a gladiator freedom. They'd be awarded a wooden sword called a rudis, a symbol of retirement and respect. Some even returned to the arena later, not because they had to, but because they missed the fame. Imagine retiring from the UFC and then unretiring because the fans just won't shut up about you. That was Rome. The fan culture was insane. Gladiator fandom makes modern celebrity culture look tame. Fans wore pendants of their favorite fighters. Women wrote love notes on walls. One Roman woman was caught sneaking into a gladiator camp disguised as a maid. These weren't mindless killing machines, they were rock stars, and their fan base absolutely unhinged. Death was for special occasions. When death did happen, it was usually for spectacle. Major festivals sometimes featured to-the-death matches for high drama, but those were rare, high-stakes events, not everyday entertainment. Killing off trained gladiators too often would have been like Netflix canceling all its shows after one episode. The Romans were brutal, but they weren't stupid. A day in the life. So picture this. You wake up at sunrise in your dorm at the Ludus. You eat barley porridge, do some sword drills, maybe get yelled at by your trainer. Then it's time to head to the arena. The crowd's screaming, the emperor's watching, and your stomach's doing backflips. You fight, you win, the crowd chants your name. You're bruised, tired, and your arm hurts like crazy. But you're alive. And tomorrow, you get to do it again. That was the gladiator's life. Dangerous, yes, but also full of purpose, pride, and maybe a bit of fun. Why the death myth survived. So why do we still think every fight ended in death? Because it's more dramatic. The Romans exaggerated it, later historians romanticized it, and filmmakers ran wild with it. A story about professional athletes with contracts and referees? Not exciting. A story about men fighting to the death in front of bloodthirsty crowds? That's blockbuster material. So the truth got buried under centuries of retelling, one sword swing at a time. What the games really meant. The Colosseum wasn't built just for entertainment. It was propaganda. Every fight, every cheer, every mercy decision reminded Rome that its rulers controlled everything, even life itself. The games were a political performance, a message written in blood and applause. Rome is strong, Rome is eternal, Rome decides who lives and dies. And that message echoed louder than any victory cry. Gladiators, heroes, not victims. The next time you see a movie showing gladiators dying every 5 minutes, remember, they weren't expendable. They were trained athletes, national celebrities, and walking symbols of Roman power.
Number 4. The Viking Horned Helmet Lie. History's coolest costume fail. Picture a Viking. You probably see it instantly. A mountain of a man with braided hair, fur coat, massive beard, swinging an axe the size of a door, and of course, that iconic horned helmet. It's such a strong image that you can't imagine a Viking without it. It's on t-shirts, TV shows, cereal boxes, and every Halloween costume sits forever. There's just one problem. It's completely fake. Vikings never wore horned helmets. Not in battle, not in raids, not ever. It's one of the biggest costume lies in human history, a myth so powerful it outlived the actual Viking age by more than 1,000 years. The birth of the horned helmet myth. So how did this lie start? Did archaeologists find a weird Viking helmet with horns? Nope. The idea was born in the 19th century, over 800 years after the last Viking hung up his axe. It all started with a German opera. In 1876, a costume designer named Karl Emil Doppler was working on Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen, a massive four-part fantasy opera about gods, heroes, and doomed love. He wanted the warriors to look wild and powerful, so he added horns to their helmets, because horns looked awesome. Audiences loved it. Artists copied it. And just like that, the Viking horned helmet was born not from history, but from theater fashion. It's like if someone made a movie where Roman soldiers wore sunglasses, and future generations believed it was true. The real Viking helmets. Now, let's talk about what Vikings actually wore. Archaeologists have found only one nearly complete Viking helmet, the Geirmundur helmet, discovered in Norway in 1943. And guess what? It's smooth, rounded, and completely hornless. No spikes, no horns, no fancy decorations, just simple, practical iron built for survival. Because if you're in the middle of a sword fight, the last thing you want on your head is two metal handles screaming, "Please, stab me here." Wearing horns in battle would have been like attaching a selfie stick to your skull. Cool in theory, fatal in practice. The real Vikings were warriors, yes, but also engineers. Their gear was built for efficiency, not aesthetics. They cared about staying alive, not looking like mascots for a metal band. So where did the horn idea come from? Horned helmets did exist, but long before the Vikings. They belonged to Bronze Age cultures in Northern Europe hundreds of years earlier. Those helmets weren't for battle, they were ceremonial, used by priests and shamans in rituals, probably to look intimidating or godlike. When 19th century archaeologists dug up those ancient helmets, artists assumed they belonged to Vikings. Combine that with Wagner's opera, and boom, the legend was born. In short, a theater designer wanted flair. Historians jumped to conclusions, and the world never looked back. The real Vikings were clean freaks? The horn myth is just the tip of the iceberg. Vikings have been misrepresented in so many ways. Hollywood paints them as filthy, blood-soaked savages who smelled of despair. But the truth is, they were surprisingly clean. Excavations in Viking settlements uncovered tons of grooming tools, combs, razors, tweezers, even ear picks. They bathed weekly, which for the 9th century was basically luxury spa behavior. Meanwhile, most Europeans at the time thought bathing more than twice a year was suspicious. In England, monks complained that Viking men were too clean and charming because women found them irresistible. Imagine being so hygienic your enemies accuse you of witchcraft. The Viking look was stylish. Forget animal skins and dirty rags. Vikings wore colorful clothes made of wool, linen, and leather. They used natural dyes, reds, blues, yellows, and accessorized with jewelry and embroidered belts. They didn't dress like savages, they dressed like runway models with swords. Their helmets and armor were simple but effective, their hair was trimmed neatly, and they even used eyeliner made from crushed minerals, not for vanity but to reduce glare from the sun and snow. So yeah, Vikings were basically functional fashion icons. Vikings, traders, not just raiders. Here's another twist. Most Vikings weren't raiders at all. Sure, raiding was part of the job description, but the majority were farmers, merchants, and explorers. They built some of the most advanced ships in the medieval world, sleek, flexible, and fast. Their long ships could sail across oceans or navigate shallow rivers, making them the first people in Europe to pull off both coastal raids and cross-continental trade. They traveled everywhere: England, Ireland, France, Russia, even North America 500 years before Columbus. Basically, the Vikings were history's most terrifying entrepreneurs. They'd raid your monastery on Monday and trade you furs and silver on Tuesday. The psychology of horns. So, why do we love the horned helmet image so much? Because it fits our idea of barbarian. It's dramatic, it's artistic, and it gives the Vikings a mythical quality.
We like our villains to look villainous. The horns make them seem otherworldly, half man, half beast. It turns them into fantasy figures rather than actual humans who bathed regularly and paid taxes. The horned helmet became a symbol of raw power, of primal chaos. Even if it's totally inaccurate, it feels right for the legend. The pop culture domino effect. Once Wagner's horn design hit the stage, the dominoes started falling fast. Artists copied the look, cartoonists exaggerated it, and by the time film and television came along, the myth was locked in forever. Even the Minnesota Vikings football team kept the horns, because let's be honest, a historically accurate helmet wouldn't look nearly as cool on a logo. So now, even though every historian in the world is yelling, "They never wore horns," we're too emotionally attached to the image to care. What real Viking helmets looked like? The real deal was practical. A rounded iron dome to deflect blows, a nose guard for face protection, sometimes chainmail at the back for neck defense. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. These helmets were rare, expensive, and prized possessions. Most Vikings probably wore leather or cloth caps, with metal reserved for the wealthy or professional warriors. No spikes, no antlers, no cow cosplay, just good, solid engineering. Beyond battle, Viking culture. The Viking Age, roughly 793 to 1066 AD, wasn't just about war. It was a cultural explosion. They built settlements, wrote poetry, practiced complex religion, and had democratic assemblies called things, where free men voted on laws. Yes, the same people who've terrified Europe also invented the medieval version of town hall meetings. They believed in honor, family, and the afterlife, especially Valhalla, a warrior paradise where fallen heroes feasted forever. But even that idea got overhyped. Valhalla wasn't the only afterlife. Most Vikings expected to end up somewhere calmer, like Folkvanger, ruled by the goddess Freya. Less drinking, more gardening. So even spiritually, the Vikings were more nuanced than legend gives them credit for. Why the truth got buried. The horned helmet myth stuck because it was visual perfection. It made the Vikings stand out. It gave artists something to exaggerate and audiences something to fear. Real history is messy. Farmers, traders, and family men don't make for exciting villains. So the myth survived because it looked cool and no one was around to fact-check. Once a lie gets a good costume, it's basically immortal. Vikings more than their myths. The real Vikings deserve credit for being innovators, explorers, and cultural game changers. They crossed oceans using nothing but stars and instinct. They built settlements, wrote poetry, practiced complex religion, and had democratic assemblies called things, where free men voted on laws. Yes, the same people who terrified Europe also invented the medieval version of town hall meetings. They believed in honor, family, and the afterlife, especially Valhalla, a warrior paradise where fallen heroes feasted forever. But even that idea got overhyped. Valhalla wasn't the only afterlife. Most Vikings expected to end up somewhere calmer, like Folkvanger, ruled by the goddess Freya. Less drinking, more gardening. So even spiritually, the Vikings were more nuanced than legend gives them credit for. Why the truth got buried. The horned helmet myth stuck because it was visual perfection. It made the Vikings stand out. It gave artists something to exaggerate and audiences something to fear. Real history is messy. Farmers, traders, and family men don't make for exciting villains. So the myth survived because it looked cool and no one was around to fact-check.
Number 4. The Viking horned helmet lie. History's coolest costume fail. Picture a Viking. You probably see it instantly. A mountain of a man with braided hair, fur coat, massive beard, swinging an axe the size of a door, and of course, that iconic horned helmet. It's such a strong image that you can't imagine a Viking without it. It's on t-shirts, TV shows, cereal boxes, and every Halloween costume since forever. There's just one problem. It's completely fake. Vikings never wore horned helmets. not in battle, not in raids, not ever. It's one of the biggest costume lies in human history, a myth so powerful it outlived the actual Viking Age by more than 1,000 years. The birth of the horned helmet myth. So how did this lie start? Did archaeologists find a weird Viking helmet with horns? Nope. The idea was born in the 19th century, over 800 years after the last Viking hung up his axe. It all started with a German opera. In 1876, a costume designer named Karl Emil Doppler was working on Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen, a massive 4-part fantasy opera about gods, heroes, and doomed love. He wanted the warriors to look wild and powerful, so he added horns to their helmets, because horns looked awesome. Audiences loved it. Artists copied it. And just like that, the Viking horned helmet was born not from history, but from theater fashion. It's like if someone made a movie where Roman soldiers wore sunglasses, and future generations believed it was true. The real Viking helmets. Now, let's talk about what Vikings actually wore. Archaeologists have found only one nearly complete Viking helmet, the Geirmundur helmet, discovered in Norway in 1943. And guess what? It's smooth, rounded, and completely hornless. No spikes, no horns, no fancy decorations, just simple, practical iron built for survival. Because if you're in the middle of a sword fight, the last thing you want on your head is 2 metal handles screaming, "Please, stab me here." Wearing horns in battle would have been like attaching a selfie stick to your skull. Cool in theory, fatal in practice. The real Vikings were warriors, yes, but also engineers. Their gear was built for efficiency, not aesthetics. They cared about staying alive, not looking like mascots for a metal band. So where did the horn idea come from? Horned helmets did exist, but long before the Vikings. They belonged to Bronze Age cultures in Northern Europe hundreds of years earlier. Those helmets weren't for battle, they were ceremonial, used by priests and shamans in rituals, probably to look intimidating or godlike. When 19th century archaeologists dug up those ancient helmets, artists assumed they belonged to Vikings. Combine that with Wagner's opera, and boom, the legend was born. In short, a theater designer wanted flair. Historians jumped to conclusions, and the world never looked back. The real Vikings were clean freaks? The horn myth is just the tip of the iceberg. Vikings have been misrepresented in so many ways. Hollywood paints them as filthy, blood-soaked savages who smelled of despair. But the truth is, they were surprisingly clean. Excavations in Viking settlements uncovered tons of grooming tools, combs, razors, tweezers, even ear picks. They bathed weekly, which for the 9th century was basically luxury spa behavior. Meanwhile, most Europeans at the time thought bathing more than twice a year was suspicious. In England, monks complained that Viking men were too clean and charming because women found them irresistible. Imagine being so hygienic your enemies accuse you of witchcraft. The Viking look was stylish. Forget animal skins and dirty rags. Vikings wore colorful clothes made of wool, linen, and leather. They used natural dyes, reds, blues, yellows, and accessorized with jewelry and embroidered belts. They didn't dress like savages, they dressed like runway models with swords. Their helmets and armor were simple but effective. Their hair was trimmed neatly, and they even used eyeliner made from crushed minerals, not for vanity but to reduce glare from the sun and snow. So yeah, Vikings were basically functional fashion icons. Vikings traders, not just raiders. Here's another twist. Most Vikings weren't raiders at all. Sure, raiding was part of the job description, but the majority were farmers, merchants, and explorers. They built some of the most advanced ships in the medieval world, sleek, flexible, and fast. Their long ships could sail across oceans or navigate shallow rivers, making them the first people in Europe to pull off both coastal raids and cross-continental trade.
They traveled everywhere: England, Ireland, France, Russia, even North America 500 years before Columbus. Basically, the Vikings were history's most terrifying entrepreneurs. They'd raid your monastery on Monday and trade you furs and silver on Tuesday. The psychology of horns. So, why do we love the horned helmet image so much? Because it fits our idea of barbarian. It's dramatic, it's artistic, and it gives the Vikings a mythical quality. We like our villains to look villainous. The horns make them seem otherworldly, half man, half beast. It turns them into fantasy figures rather than actual humans who bathed regularly and paid taxes. The horned helmet became a symbol of raw power, of primal chaos. Even if it's totally inaccurate, it feels right for the legend. The pop culture domino effect. Once Wagner's horn design hit the stage, the dominoes started falling fast. Artists copied the look, cartoonists exaggerated it, and by the time film and television came along, the myth was locked in forever. Even the Minnesota Vikings football team kept the horns, because let's be honest, a historically accurate helmet wouldn't look nearly as cool on a logo. So now, even though every historian in the world is yelling, "They never wore horns," we're too emotionally attached to the image to care. What real Viking helmets looked like? The real deal was practical: a rounded iron dome to deflect blows, a nose guard for face protection, sometimes chainmail at the back for neck defense. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. These helmets were rare, expensive, and prized possessions. Most Vikings probably wore leather or cloth caps, with metal reserved for the wealthy or professional warriors. No spikes, no antlers, no cow cosplay, just good, solid engineering. Beyond battle, Viking culture. The Viking Age, roughly 793 to 1066 AD, wasn't just about war. It was a cultural explosion. They built settlements, wrote poetry, practiced complex religion, and had democratic assemblies called things, where free men voted on laws. Yes, the same people who terrified Europe also invented the medieval version of town hall meetings. They believed in honor, family, and the afterlife, especially Valhalla, a warrior paradise where fallen heroes feasted forever. But even that idea got overhyped. Valhalla wasn't the only afterlife. Most Vikings expected to end up somewhere calmer, like Folkvanger, ruled by the goddess Freya. Less drinking, more gardening. So even spiritually, the Vikings were more nuanced than legend gives them credit for. Why the truth got buried. The horned helmet myth stuck because it was visual perfection. It made the Vikings stand out. It gave artists something to exaggerate and audiences something to fear. Real history is messy. Farmers, traders, and family men don't make for exciting villains. So the myth survived because it looked cool and no one was around to fact-check. Once a lie gets a good costume, it's basically immortal. Vikings more than their myths. The real Vikings deserve credit for being innovators, explorers, and cultural game changers. They crossed oceans using nothing but stars and instinct. They built settlements, wrote poetry, practiced complex religion, and had democratic assemblies called things, where free men voted on laws. Yes, the same people who terrified Europe also invented the medieval version of town hall meetings. They believed in honor, family, and the afterlife, especially Valhalla, a warrior paradise where fallen heroes feasted forever. But even that idea got overhyped. Valhalla wasn't the only afterlife. Most Vikings expected to end up somewhere calmer, like Folkvanger, ruled by the goddess Freya. Less drinking, more gardening. So even spiritually, the Vikings were more nuanced than legend gives them credit for. Why the truth got buried. The horned helmet myth stuck because it was visual perfection. It made the Vikings stand out. It gave artists something to exaggerate and audiences something to fear. Real history is messy. Farmers, traders, and family men don't make for exciting villains. So the myth survived because it looked cool and no one was around to fact-check.
Number 5. The Flat Earth Lie: How Medieval People Got Framed. Okay, let's start with the image you probably have in your head. It's the year 1492. Columbus stands at the edge of a wooden ship, gazing at the horizon like he's about to unlock a new level in history. Behind him, a bunch of terrified sailors whisper, "Don't go too far, Chris. You'll fall off the edge of the world." Dramatic, right? Too bad it's completely fake. No educated person in Columbus's time actually thought the Earth was flat. Not the scientists, not the priests, not even the average dude selling bread. They knew the Earth was round and had known it for over 2,000 years. So how did the Columbus versus Flat Earth story become one of the biggest lies in history? Strap in, we're about to expose how centuries of propaganda, politics, and lazy storytelling turned one of humanity's oldest scientific facts into a cartoon-level myth. Ancient people were way smarter than we think. Let's roll it way back. Ancient Greece. Around 500 BC, Pythagoras, yes, the triangle guy, was already saying the Earth was round. Not because he sailed around it, but because he was a math nerd who noticed stuff like, ships disappear bottom first over the horizon. A few centuries later, Aristotle added receipts. He pointed out that during lunar eclipses, the Earth's shadow on the moon is always curved. Boom! Round Earth confirmed. Then came Eratosthenes, the absolute legend of geography. In 240 BC, he used nothing but sticks and sunlight to measure the Earth's circumference. He stuck one stick in Syene, modern-day Aswan, and another in Alexandria. At noon, one cast a shadow, the other didn't. He did some quick math and came within 1% of the planet's actual size. 2,000 years ago, with sticks! Meanwhile, you and I still get confused when our phone's compass app won't calibrate. Medieval Europe wasn't that dumb. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and guess what? Everyone still knew the Earth was round. Monks copied ancient Greek texts, sailors navigated by stars, and artists even drew Earth as a sphere in religious manuscripts. Medieval scholars like Thomas Aquinas, Dante, and Bede the Venerable all described a spherical world. Even the church agreed. In fact, the idea that Christians thought the Earth was flat is one of the most unfair historical smears ever. So where did that smear come from? Spoiler, not from the church, not from Columbus, but from a few dramatic 19th century writers who wanted to make the past look dumb to make themselves look smart. The 19th century twist plot. In the 1800s, a few loud voices started pushing the Flat Earth Middle Ages story. Writers like Washington Irving, yes, the Sleepy Hollow guy, published biographies of Columbus that, let's say, took creative liberties. Irving wanted drama, so he made up a fake scene where Columbus has to convince a bunch of priests and scholars that the Earth isn't flat. In reality, the debate wasn't about the shape of the Earth. Everyone agreed it was round. It was about how big it was. Columbus thought it was smaller than it really is. The experts thought it was bigger. Spoiler, the experts were right. Columbus just got lucky that there was an entire continent in the way before his crew starved. But Irving's version sold better. It made Columbus look like a genius standing against ignorance, a man of science defeating the stupid medievals. And people ate it up. Then school books repeated it. Then cartoons illustrated it. And by the 20th century, half the world genuinely believed that everyone in 1492 thought Earth was a cosmic pizza. The real Flat Earth movement. Spoiler, it came later. Here's the funniest part. The real Flat Earth movement didn't start in ancient times or the Middle Ages. It started in the 1800s. Yep, the era of trains, telegraphs, and top hats. A guy named Samuel Rowbotham published a book called Zetetic Astronomy, Earth Not a Globe in 1849. He based his research on experiments like looking across a canal with a telescope and deciding that if he couldn't see the curve, it must not exist. He basically invented YouTube science before YouTube existed. His followers formed the Universal Zetetic Society, which later evolved into the Flat Earth Society, a club for people who decided that 2,000 years of astronomy was a government cover-up. So to be clear, ancient people knew the Earth was round. Medieval people knew the Earth was round. Victorian-era cranks with telescopes suddenly decided it wasn't. Why the myth worked so well? The Flat Earth myth became popular because it was a perfect story for the modern ego. It made us, the modern, rational people, look smarter than them, the old superstitious ones. It's like the intellectual version of, look how far we've come. The only problem is, it's fake. It's also a fantastic example of how storytelling can rewrite history. All it took were a few novelists and a century of lazy textbooks to convince the world that people used to think they'd fall off the edge of the map. The globe was everywhere. To really drive it home, let's talk receipts. Medieval globes existed. One of the oldest, the Erdapole, was built in 1492, the same year Columbus sailed. Maps from centuries earlier show round Earth illustrations. Sailors literally used the curve of the Earth to navigate long distances. They even understood time zones. When people noticed that the same star rose at different times in different cities, they knew Earth wasn't flat. So yeah, nobody was sitting around saying, if we go too far west, we'll fall into space. They were too busy calculating latitude and figuring out wind currents. Even Columbus was wrong for the right reasons. Columbus didn't set out to prove the Earth was round. He already knew that. He wanted to prove he could reach Asia faster by sailing west. He was just really, really bad at math. He thought the Earth's circumference was smaller than it actually is. His plan should have failed, and would have failed if the Americas hadn't been in the way before his crew starved. When he landed, he thought he'd reached India, which is why we still call indigenous Americans Indians. So yeah, Columbus didn't prove the Earth was round. He proved you can be wrong in multiple dimensions and still make history. Why do we still believe it? So why does the flat Earth past myth stick around even though it's been debunked 1,000 times? Because it's easy. It makes history feel like a progress story, from darkness to enlightenment, from ignorance to science. It's also comforting to think that we're smarter than everyone before us. Except, spoiler alert, most ancient people could build cathedrals without cranes and navigate oceans without GPS. We can barely find our phones without Find My iPhone. The real lesson, the power of a good story. The Flat Earth myth is a perfect example of how narratives beat facts. If a lie feels right, looks right, and makes a good story, people will believe it, even for centuries. It's why fake news spreads faster than real news. It's why myths outlive data. And it's why somewhere out there, someone is still convinced NASA photos are fake because the clouds look copied. It's not that people are stupid. It's that people love a story that flatters their ego. Fun fact, sailors could see the curve. Want physical proof the Earth is round? Just stand on a ship. As it sails away, you see the hull disappear first, then the mast, then the flag. If the world were flat, it would just shrink evenly until it vanished. That's something sailors noticed thousands of years ago. In fact, medieval navigators used the curve of the Earth to calculate distance to shore. So yeah, even pirates had better grasp of physics than 19th century conspiracy theorists. The true shape of knowledge. The Flat Earth myth doesn't just make people look silly, it steals credit from ancient scientists who were way ahead of their time. Eratosthenes, Aristotle, Al-Farghani, Islamic astronomers in Baghdad, all measured, mapped, and refined Earth's size and shape centuries before Columbus. Humanity didn't just guess the Earth was round, we proved it, mathematically and observationally, long before telescopes existed. So next time someone says, people in the Middle Ages thought the Earth was flat, feel free to correct them, because they didn't. But a novelist in 1828 definitely did. Full circle, what all these lies have in common. Let's zoom out for a second. All 5 of these historical lies, Napoleon's height, the bloodthirsty gladiators, the slave-built pyramids, the horned Vikings, and the flat Earth myth, have one thing in common. They weren't created by ignorance. They were created by storytelling. Humans love stories that simplify reality. It's easier to remember Napoleon was short than average height for his era.
It's more dramatic to imagine gladiators dying every fight than accountants managing fight rosters. And it's way more fun to picture Vikings with horns than Vikings doing taxes. History isn't just about facts. It's about how those facts get told, twisted, and memified over time. The real lesson: don't trust a good story too much. So here's the ultimate takeaway. If a story from history sounds too neat, too dramatic, or too meme-worthy, it probably isn't true. The truth is usually messier, smarter, and way more human. But sometimes we like our myths so much that we turn them into reality. So go ahead, enjoy the memes, laugh at the myths. But remember, the past wasn't stupid, it was just misunderstood by us.